Welcome, everyone. I will share some details on the translation in Spanish, so please bear with us. We'll be having simultaneous translation tonight. So I will be making the announcement in Spanish since the translation available is from English to Spanish. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Estaremos brindando interpretación simultánea para el programa esta noche. Por favor, diríjanse a la parte de abajo de la pantalla, donde pueden encontrar el icono del globo y ahí pueden elegir el español para la interpretación del programa en esta noche. I will now go into sharing the mic with Ike, who will be doing the welcoming from the U.S.-Cuba Normalization Committee.
Thank you, Claudia, and welcome to, I believe, I don't know how many people are on. I'm seeing about 250 so far. We have 554 people that have registered for this. I'm sure going to be a wonderful evening. My name is Ike Naham. I am a retired Amtrak locomotive engineer and Teamsters Union member. And on behalf of the International U.S.-Cuba Normalization Committee, I want to welcome all of our sisters and brothers in struggle. This is the 14th or 15th international webinar attended by thousands of people that our growing Cuba Solidarity movement has held since March 2020 and the explosion of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have been expanding greatly the work of fighting the criminal U.S. blockade. We are coming together tonight in the light of the victory secured with the guilty verdict against the killer cop, Derek Chauvin. Our movement in Minnesota is part of the struggle there. And our movement nationally, the Cuba Solidarity Movement, has raised and held webinars around the question why there are no George Floyds in Cuba. And we are part of the movement to jail killer and brutal cops. Since our united non-sectarian international coalition has consolidated and expanded our work over these past 15 months, we are finding new allies and joining with new forces and fighting for this beautiful cause on many fronts and in many cities in the United States and Canada and around the world. We have found many fronts of struggle to fight against the blockade: legislative, resolutions, in the streets with the great new development of caravans initiated by Cuban Americans in South Florida and other cities, resolutions passed by many cities in the United States, and education and agitation against the blockade in webinars like tonight. In a few minutes, we will be hearing shortly from our brother Bob Schwartz about the campaign, Syringes for Cuba campaign, of the Saving Lives campaign that we're all working on, that we want to launch this, this inspiring campaign. We are doing this and all of this activity as the world today takes notice, including in the United States, of Cuba's amazing breakthroughs in the design, development, and production of vaccines, on top of its heroic example of medical internationalism through the Henry Reeve brigades. And yet, the Joseph Biden administration has chosen so far to maintain the continuity of U.S. anti-Cuban aggression and blockade that were deepened under the Trump administration. This is unacceptable, and we are stepping up our anti-blockade activity on every front with our Cuban sisters and brothers, and with the mobilization and internationally coordinated actions of our allies around the world. We are all looking to the upcoming June 23rd vote in the United Nations that will, I'm sure, be overwhelmingly against the blockade. Tonight's webinar is not just a history lesson, but rather we aim to draw out the lessons of the rich history from April 1961, 60 years ago. Just as today, the response of bipartisan Washington to Cuba's revolutionary example set with the launching of the Literacy Campaign, the land reform, the smashing of Jim Crow segregation, the advances of women's liberation and workers' rights. Just as back then, the response of Washington was stepped up terrorism and economic sabotage and organizing the Bay of Pigs mercenary invasion. Just as today, as was deepened under Trump and is continuing so far under the Biden administration, the response to Cuba's inspiring, internationally acclaimed, and loved leadership in the battle to conquer COVID-19 is to tighten the blockade. Not only is this unacceptable, but we believe it is also politically unsustainable. And our job is to ensure that, and please join us in this. Sign up to work with a local coalition in your area. Join the next caravan. Get an anti-blockade resolution passed in your city, union, church, mosque, temple, synagogue. Protest on June 23rd at the UN vote. Pressure your elected officials on Capitol Hill. Now it is my pleasure to turn over the direction of tonight's amazing program to our two co-chairs, my friends and comrades from the struggle in New York City, Claudia De La Cruz and Manolo De Los Santos, two outstanding young leaders who carry the torch for freedom, justice, and equality by any means necessary, as Malcolm X put it, in their great work in the creation of the wonderful People's Forum in the heart of Manhattan in New York City, which has always embraced and provided a great venue for the Cuba Solidarity Movement. So I'm going to introduce Claudia and Manolo, give a brief bio of them, and then they will take over. Claudia De La Cruz is the executive co-director of the People's Forum. Claudia is a popular educator, community organizer, and theologian. Her political formation and organizing skills result from over 13 years of experience and creation of political education and cultural spaces in the city of New York and across the country. Claudia is part of a long tradition of radical organizing in immigrant communities and solidarity work connected to Latin American and the Caribbean popular movements. She is also a founding member of the Popular Education Project, a collective of organizers and educators committed to the political formation of organizers in the United States. Manolo De Los Santos is an executive co-director of the People's Forum. Manolo is an organizer and educator. He owes his political education to people's movements from the Caribbean to New York City. He was the founding director of the People's Forum, a movement incubator for working class communities to help to build unity across historic lines of division at home and abroad. He is also a researcher with the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research and was a representative in Cuba for IFCO Pastors for Peace. Thank you very much, and I turn it over to Claudia and Manolo.
Thank you so much, Ike. We want to thank the International U.S.-Cuba Normalization Committee for organizing this very important webinar 60 years ago until today, defining anniversaries of the Cuban Revolution. From the Literacy Campaign to Playa, Girón, we are definitely honored to be asked to co-chair, to be amongst comrades, all hundreds of them that are connected right now. We want to thank the speakers. We also want to thank the interpreters who are with us tonight. and each and every one of the folks that are connected to this virtual conversation. We believe that the revolutionary task of highlighting the advances and victories and the resilience of the Cuban Revolution is particularly important in our current context of deep global crisis, misinformation, and obviously the intensification of imperialist offensive. And we know that the Cuban revolutionary process and the strength of the Cuban people have always been an inspiration to everyone engaged in struggle against exploitation, oppression at a worldwide scale. The solidarity and commitment of the Cuban Revolution in the advancement of humanity, the advancement of the agenda of the working class, the poor and dispossessed, is a true testament and lesson of what we can do when we come together and build a revolutionary process. And therefore, it is important for us, especially those of us in the United States, to know and defend the Cuban Revolution and the right of its people to continue strengthening its socialist project, which is an internationalist project and a beam of hope for us all. So thank you so much for inviting us. And Manolo?
I just want to say that too. Thank you for inviting us and for having us with you. We are so honored to join not just the speakers tonight, but the voices of all those who are watching today's webinar. We are this growing movement of people who say no to the US blockade of Cuba, who say no to US aggression and imperialism. We're brought together in a sense by two wonderful events that mark April, the month of April. One, the Cuban Literacy Campaign, which inspired young people in Cuba to go into the mountains, to go into the valleys and teach their fellow Cubans how to read and write, but more importantly, to regain their protagonism as revolutionary citizens of the world. We're also honored by the kick-ass defeat of US imperialism in the Battle of the Bay of Pigs, what was thought unthinkable, that a small island nation, the people considered the lesser ones, were capable of defeating a mercenary invasion planned, funded, and organized out of the United States. So we are in a month of victories. We're in a month of inspiration, as Cuba has just come out of their party Congress, as the Cuban people, despite all these challenges, continue to bring us and remind us that there's actually a world worth fighting for, and there's a way to it. We want to start off the evening with some words from a dear comrade and brother, Bob Schwartz, who is Director of Global Health Partners. Since 1994, Global Health Partners has been working with the Cuban Public Ministry of Health and actually delivering, I would say, priceless aid, medical aid to the Cuban people in spite of a monstrous and cruel blockade. So Bob, over to you.
Thanks, Manolo. Thanks for the introduction, and it's great to be with everybody tonight and to be celebrating the achievements of the Cuban Revolution. It's awkward to be opening this webinar with a pitch asking for help.
Y estamos aquí para ayudar por ustedes, pero para ser honestos con ustedes,
most important act of solidarity that all of us can do for Cuba right now. As you know, over the past year, Cuba has sent thousands of health workers, 52 international medical brigades to 39 countries that were overwhelmed by the pandemic. Cuba's international medical brigades have treated patients and saved lives for the past 15 years in dozens of countries, confronting natural disasters, serious pandemics. You all recall the Ebola crisis in West Africa. Cuba's developed 5 recognized candidate COVID-19 vaccines, and 2 are currently in phase 3 clinical trials. Cuba has ambitious plans to vaccinate its entire population by the end of the year, and they plan to produce 100 million doses of vaccine to meet their commitment to sharing its low-cost vaccines with poor countries in the developing world. But Cuba's mass vaccination efforts are only going to succeed if they have the syringes that they desperately need. So the Saving Lives campaign, which is a broad coalition of local and national organizations that are opposed to the blockade, and Global Health Partners, which I'm associated with, are building a campaign to supply those syringes to Cuba. The country has a shortage of roughly 20 million syringes that are vital to the goal of vaccinating the entire Cuban population against COVID. And we plan to address that shortage, but we're going to need your help. Syringes are in short supply. Every country in the world is looking for the same exact syringe. And like Clorox wipes last year, the price of syringes has skyrocketed, going from 3 cents to as much as 50 cents per syringe. So we're committed to raising $100,000 this month to start rushing syringes to Cuba as soon as the Commerce Department issues an export license. Sending syringes is going to save lives, and it also helped to reopen Cuba's economy. So at this point, during the webinar, I guess later on, and on every Zoom call and Cuba webinar over the next few months, organizers are going to be posting links asking you to make a contribution to this effort. And for those of you who are concerned about tax deductibility, yes, contributions are tax deductible. So I hope everybody's going to dig deep and show your solidarity with a country that's done so much for the health of its own people and for struggling communities around the world. Thanks for listening. If anyone has any questions about this effort, please reach out to me or to the Saving Lives campaign. Back to you, Manolo.
Thank you so much, Bob. Please respond to the call of solidarity, rush the syringes to Cuba to save lives. And if you are unable to support, please spread the word. That's another way of supporting. Let others know that they can be part of this project. So up next, we will be showing a video of the Bay of Pigs invasion. And so like Manolo and others have said before, this is a historic moment in which a small island in the Caribbean actually kicked the ass of the CIA and the US government. And it's important to say that, and it's important to say it that way because in many occasions we are told as a people that we are unable to be victorious against the biggest empire. But Cuba has been able to do this and advance its socialist project. And so we're very happy and very proud of this historic moment, and please stay tuned for the video.
Me despertó la explosión, me asomé a la ventana y pude ver uno de los aviones saliendo. Le dije a la señora mía, parece que se equivocó la artillería antiaérea nuestra y le tiró un avión nuestro. Cuando procedí a acostarme nuevamente, las explosiones volvieron y el fuego antiaéreo más nutrido. Me di cuenta que era un bombardeo.
Son bombardeados los aeropuertos de Santiago de Cuba, Ciudad Libertad y San Antonio de los Baños.
Lo que no pueden perdonarnos los imperialistas es que estemos aquí y que hayamos hecho una revolución socialista en las propias narices de los Estados Unidos y que esa revolución socialista la defendemos con esos fusiles. Compañeros, todas las unidades deben dirigirse hacia la sede de sus respectivos batallones en vista de la movilización ordenada para mantener el país en estado de alerta ante la inminencia que se deduce de todos los hechos de las últimas semanas y del cobarde ataque de ayer, de la agresión de los mercenarios. Marchemos a las casas de los milicianos, formemos los batallones y pongámonos a salirle al frente al enemigo con el himno nacional, con la estrofa del himno patriótico, con el grito de al combate, con la convicción de que morir por la patria es vivir, y que en cadenas vivir es vivir en oprobio y afrenta asumir.
Es el preludio de la invasión de Playa Girón o Bahía de Cochinos, la más grande operación militar organizada por la CIA.
Al atardecer del 14 de abril, la flotilla formada por 7 barcos esperaba en aguas de Puerto Cabezas. Luis Somoza, dictador de Nicaragua, apareció en el muelle con la cara empolvada y rodeado de su escolta. Gritó con desgarro: «Traedme un par de pelos de la barba de Castro», y agitó su brazo en la despedida.
Comienza la batalla de Girón. Las primeras víctimas son civiles.
Mi esposo cayó en aquella esquina. Entonces, aquí cayó el José Luis Martínez Paredes. Mi sobrina cayó aquí en este lugar. Entonces mi hermana cayó aquí, de la arequita esa para allá un poquito. Yo no me doy cuenta todavía cómo yo me pude ver en tierra, saltar del camión, porque no hago memoria como yo me vi en tierra. Sé que en el camión no estaba.
La brigada de asalto trae, entre otras fuerzas, más de 1.500 hombres, 16 aviones de combate, 5 tanques de guerra Sherman, 10 carros blindados, 21 cañones sin retroceso. Su poder de fuego es muy superior al que jamás tuvo el ejército rebelde en la sierra o ningún movimiento guerrillero en la historia de América Latina o del mundo. 176 muertos y más de 300 heridos entre soldados, milicianos y civiles es el saldo de la invasión. Tras la sorpresa inicial, las fuerzas cubanas despliegan su contraofensiva. Los aviones B-26 derribados vienen disfrazados con las siglas del ejército cubano. De 72 horas es liquidada la invasión. $1,197 prisioneros. Expropietarios, hijos de latifundistas y de la alta sociedad, politiqueros, antiguos soldados de la tiranía y torturadores son parte de la variada composición de esta brigada. No pudieron cumplir la misión de sostener al menos 72 horas una cabeza de playa que permitiera la intervención directa norteamericana.
Los objetivos, a nosotros se nos pintó una película de muchos colores. Jamás se fue sincero con nosotros. Incluso se nos dijo que esto duraría unas horas y que la política de Fidel Castro cambiaría y que estaba todo tan maduro que el pueblo de Cuba iba a cambiar totalmente. Y entonces yo cambié con el superior de España, de permiso, le dije que me dejara ir a ver los campamentos, de estos muchachos cubanos, amigos míos de Miami, que dijeron que era una cosa fantástica. Y ahí me embullé y ahí fui. Padre, ¿qué le parece? No se puede salir después.
¿Por qué?
No le permiten a usted las autoridades.
¿Quién gana el campamento?
Los americanos.
Definitivamente cae el águila norteamericana. Son juzgados los casi 1.200 mercenarios tomados prisioneros. De forma abierta, Estados Unidos asume ante el mundo la paternidad de la invasión.
Es un honor para mí el estar hoy entre un grupo de los hombres más valientes del mundo.
Los hombres más valientes del mundo. Los valientes de Jacqueline.
El gobierno norteamericano acepta recogerlos a cambio de pagar a Cuba una indemnización de $62 millones. Los prisioneros son canjeados por medicinas y alimentos. Mercenarios por compotas, como se conoció popularmente la negociación. Es el final tragicómico de una de las mayores agresiones militares ejecutadas desde Estados Unidos contra un pequeño país latinoamericano, soberano e independiente.
That was a very inspiring and moving video testimony of the Battle of the Bay of Pigs. Later on, the US government itself had to admit that this was perhaps the greatest fiasco in its history. The CIA had never known such a public and humiliating defeat in an attempt to overthrow a government in the third world. Very inspiring to this day. And now we can say we are even more honored to not just have seen this video testimony, but that we will hear from Cuba's voices itself. We're honored to have with us tonight Ambassador Pedro Luis Pedroso Cuesta, who is Cuba's permanent representative to the United Nations. He is a graduate of Cuba School of International Relations, the Raul Roa Garcia School, and holds a master's degree in national defense. He has represented Cuba in several countries and was for a time Cuba's representative to the United Nations office in Geneva. Again, we are here honored to have you join us, not just because you are a diplomat, not just because you are Cuban, but ultimately because you are a revolutionary comrade who speaks from the heart and with the radical truth that Fidel taught you and the Cuban people. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Manolo. I'm delighted in joining you. Good evening to everyone. Good evening to the more than 300 followers that already are following this very important event. Dear friends, I'm deeply grateful to the U.S.-Cuba Normalization and Saving Lives campaign for organizing this symbolic event. I also sincerely thank the distinguished panelists who will join us during this session. April is indeed a particularly significant month in Cuba's history. In addition to a new anniversary of the Literacy Campaign, which is the best example of the work of the revolution in favor of democratizing education and culture, April this year witnessed the 60th anniversary of the first defeat of the US imperialism in Latin America on the sands of Playa Girón. Also 60 years ago, and just in the prelude to the mercenary invasion, Fidel declared the socialist character of the revolution. The three events are undeniably interconnected. Only a socialist revolution could step up to and meet to the challenge of educating the entire
el reto, el proceso de reivindicar la dignidad humana y el modelo que seguimos, que seguimos ahora. Sin embargo, otra manera de comprender la realidad y tener la audacia de hacer una revolución socialista en Cuba y que, aunque sea incómodo para los intereses imperialistas de Estados Unidos. Eso demuestra la importancia de la victoria en Bahía de Cochinos, no solo por los mercenarios que fueron capturados, pero también por los que los patrocinaron en Washington. La victoria lo que significa Cuba es David contra Goliat. Es por eso porque siguen manteniendo hoy mismo un bloqueo ilegal contra Cuba que ha sido rechazado por la comunidad internacional. Estimados amigos, este abril ha sido particularmente importante. Hemos concluido el proceso monumental del Congreso, 8 Congreso del Partido Comunista de Cuba. Además de seguir el camino que hemos seguido hasta ahora, también reemplazar en la dirección, en el gobierno y en el Estado, a nueva sangre que ha sido esencial para la continuidad de la revolución, y este proceso ha sido concluido. Por lo tanto, los patriotas cubanos en todo el mundo tienen muchas razones para celebrar y ser optimistas sobre el futuro de Cuba y de la revolución. Vamos a seguir determinados defendiendo nuestra independencia soberana y nuestra Cuba socialista. Les doy muchas gracias. Ahora vamos a escuchar
another dear and honored guest speaker, the Ambassador Lianys, who is Cuba's newest ambassador to the United States in Washington, D.C. We're honored to have her message, and we'll play it right now.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to speak in this webinar. I would have preferred to be with you in person and share the panel with the distinguished members that will take the floor, but unfortunately, it was impossible for me. However, I wouldn't miss the opportunity to extend my greetings to all of you. I thank the Cuban Solidarity Network for organizing this event to remember the importance of dates like this because of what they meant and mean today for Cuba. And I could venture to say that for other countries as well. The National Literacy Campaign in Cuba was undoubtedly a great step toward progress in equality and social development, which were the guiding principle of the fledgling revolution then and are fully in place today. As you know, in 1961 in Cuba, roughly 250,000 volunteers, most of whom were young women, traveled to every corner in Cuba to teach how to read and write. They packed their bags, armed with only a few textbooks and a kerosene lamp, and went to the farthest rural towns and hamlets, many of which had not electricity, running water, nor paved roads. In just over a year, the literacy campaign reduced illiteracy from over 20% in 1958 to 39% in 1961. Illiteracy in rural areas affected over 50% of the population in 1958. We could say that the campaign was a success thanks to the dedication and love of the young volunteers. Many of the improvised teachers continued their careers in the field of education as they saw the power that education has to change the world and value the act of love that teaching is. Cubans, regardless of their political position, always acknowledge that milestone of the revolution that intended to eradicate illiteracy in 1 year and to facilitate universal access to the different levels of education at no cost. I can tell you it was an epic battle. 1 million illiterates were taught how to read and write. It was exciting to see how tears ran down their faces when they were able to read the literacy textbook and newspapers. But we can also say that the work of the revolution in this field was not over. It continued, first by turning the military barracks into schools, then by expanding the Cuban education system and guaranteeing free and universal access to education, which is endorsed and guaranteed today in the Constitution that establishes in its Article 73 that education is the right of every person and responsibility of the state, which guarantees free, accessible, and quality education services for a comprehensive education, from kindergarten until graduate school. Likewise, it lies down among its political foundation and principles that the Cuban state includes as part of its objective to ensure the educational, scientific, technical, and cultural development of the country. As those who were teaching how to read and write were fighting against their enemy, ignorance and widespread illiteracy, their countrymen members of the militia were fighting against what was left of the mercenaries supporting the dictator Batista in the mountains and the invasion in Playa Girón. Girón was an example of the reaffirmation of the Cuban people's support to the revolution that was growing through the implementation of a social justice program and several laws. A revolution in a country that had been subdued, exploited, humiliated, where peasants lacked land, where people were robbed constantly, killed, tortured, murdered, where the number of illiterates was huge, where almost 60 children out of 1,000 live births died every year, where there was a lack of schools, while 10,000 teachers were unemployed. But the socialist character of the revolution proclaimed on the eve of the invasion was reaffirmed with the passing of the new constitution of the Republic and ratified in a referendum on February 24, 2 years ago in 2019. 60 years have passed since the mercenary invasion in Playa Girón, but it is an event that is very much alive since the external enemies of the revolution has not ceased in their attempt to subvert it through media campaigns, finance subversion, and the enforcement of direct measures affecting the possibilities of full development in every sphere sphere of the Cuban social life. Today, the blockade, more reinforced than ever, continues to be the main hindrance against Cuba's development. A terrible, painful obstacle in the middle of a pandemic like the one the world is facing since 2020, and not even in this hard condition has a single sanction been lifted. On the contrary, more than 240 measures have been taken against the Cuban people that refuses to be enslaved. So thank you for inviting me again to this webinar. I wish you all the best and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so very much to Ambassador Pedro Luis Pedroso Cuesta and Ambassador Lianys Torres Rivera, and for reminding us of our revolutionary task to work
por tomar este trabajo revolucionario de terminar el bloqueo contra Cuba.
Para acabar
Nosotros
con el bloqueo
deberíamos
de
de
Cuba,
romper el
acabar
imperio de los Estados Unidos. Ese es
el
nuestro
poder
trabajo.
del imperialismo
Es mi
estadounidense. Es mi placer
poder presentar a nuestro
introducir nuestro Peter Kornbluh, que es un analista, señor de los archivos de seguridad, es el autor y el editor de muchos libros sobre Cuba y sobre el Irán Contra, el escándalo Irán Contra, y sobre documentos también el expediente de Pinochet, y el más reciente de su libro es Volver a Cuba, y sobre las relaciones entre Washington y La Habana. Y él trabaja y apareció en varios documentales. Él estuvo activo y tenemos el gran honor de tenerlo con nosotros. Usted tiene el micrófono. Muchas gracias. Esto es un evento muy importante. Yo agradezco mucho por la campaña para las jeringas para Cuba. Yo estuve
push that campaign forward. I much prefer the Spanish translation of comrade, compañero, to comrade, but really I'm just a historian, and I have spent quite a bit of time working on the Bay of Pigs issue. I did have the incredible honor of working with the Cuban government and Fidel Castro's office to organize the 40th anniversary conference on Playa Girón, for which we brought all the surviving members of the Kennedy White House, some surviving CIA officials, and 5 members of the actual brigade to Cuba to sit down in a civilized way and discuss this history with Fidel and his veterans and commanders from that event. It was a rather extraordinary 3 days. We brought about 100 reporters as well, so that Cuba would have a formal and organized kind of opportunity through this historical conference to share its own history of how it was victorious at the Bay of Pigs 60 years ago. And it's not only 60 years since the defeat of the CIA-led brigade, but I think was 60 years ago yesterday that John F. Kennedy went before the press and basically, had to admit that he was the responsible party for this debacle. He also told the press something that I think is worth remembering today, 60 years later. He said, a wise man once said that an error doesn't become a mistake unless you refuse to correct it. And he said there are many, many sobering lessons for us all to learn. And I think everybody participating in this event would agree that some of the lessons are obvious. And paramilitary invasion of a sovereign state of Cuba is a crime against the Cuban people. It's a violation of international law. But there were other actual lessons that even establishment Washington, I think, started to think about at that moment. One of them was that the CIA should not be in the business of paramilitary invasions of other countries, let alone covert operations in other countries. And this was a conclusion on the paramilitary invasion side that even the CIA's own Inspector General arrived at in a 100-page investigative report on the CIA's own failings at the Bay of Pigs, one of which was that this was an operation well beyond its capabilities and authority, and it shouldn't have been involved in leading this invasion. The report was so hostile to the CIA itself that the new CIA director recalled all printed volumes of it, destroyed almost all of them, locked the last 2 or 3 in a safe, and it took us over 35 years to get this document, which I consider the holy grail of the Bay of Pigs, declassified. But it's very much worth reading. You can read about it in my book, Bay of Pigs Declassified, or see the actual document on the website of my organization, the National Security Archive. So that's one lesson. But the other lesson, which is, I think, even more resonant today, is that the United States hurt itself. It did not advance its own interests, let alone the interests of the Cuban people, by sponsoring this paramilitary invasion. It not only did not advance and would not advance U.S. interests, but it was dangerous to U.S. interests. We have to remember that the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis is coming up next year, and there's a straight line from the Bay of Pigs invasion through Operation Mongoose, which Kennedy authorized after the failure at the Bay of Pigs, to the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world was brought to the brink of nuclear Armageddon, because Cuba defended itself by accepting the Soviet offer of having missiles to deter another US invasion of the island. I think Kennedy, for those of you who are interested in this history, did actually start to think about the lessons of US aggression towards Cuba.
A pensar sobre la derrota y cuando fue asesinado. Él estuvo mezclado con unos esfuerzos con canales indirectos para ver si hubo unos intentos de reconciliación. Este episodio que se desarrolló, hubo un desarrollo con los prisioneros, las relaciones con Cuba en las primeras negociaciones para ver las consecuencias de esta agresión. Yo diría, para concluir, que todos los presidentes de Estados Unidos que no aprendieron esta lección, incluso Barack Obama, que fue allá y dejó de lado 20 años de relaciones negativas con Cuba, y llegaron a un esfuerzo abierto. Trump intentó sabotear y quiso reempezar con esta política, pero después de 100 días él fracasó. Es el interés de los pueblos sobre el derecho internacional y la soberanía de los pueblos. Está otra vez los Estados Unidos dejando de lado las lesiones sacadas de la experiencia de la Playa Girón. Muchas gracias, profesor. Esto era formidable. Yo pienso que deberíamos organizar una campaña para enviar.
They might actually learn something if they read it. I remember there's a line in Kirkpatrick's report to the CIA. He says that the CIA consistently failed to properly assess the information recovered in Cuba. It's a lesson I think the US still hasn't learned. They still don't know how to read the reality on the ground in Cuba. They still don't understand the trajectory and the spirit and the actions of the Cuban people. We now want to present a beautiful video from one of Cuba's most important singer-songwriters and, leaders of the Nueva Trova movement. Her name is Sara Gonzalez, and this video is called Girón, La Victoria.
Cuando cambia el rojo color del cielo por el blanco color de palomas, se oyen las campanas de los hombres que levantan sus sonrisas de las lomas. Después que entre pecho y pecho deseo de quemar, de matar, de vengar y de vencer. Cuando no se olvida que no hay libertad regalada sino tallada sobre el mármol y la piedra de monumentos llenos de flores y de tierra y de los héroes muertos en las guerras. Se tiene que luchar y ganar, se tiene que vivir y amar, se tiene que reír y bailar, se tiene que morir y crear. Canto y llanto de la tierra, canto y llanto de la gloria, y entre canto y llanto de la guerra, nuestra primera victoria. De luces se llenó el cielo de esta tierra insurrecta, y entre luces se batió seguro, buscando la victoria nuestra. Hoy se camina confiado por los surcos de la historia, donde pelearon los héroes para alcanzar la victoria. Canto y llanto de la tierra, canto y llanto de la gloria, y entre canto y llanto de la guerra, nuestra primera victoria. Canto y llanto de la tierra, canto y llanto de la gloria, y entre canto y llanto de la guerra, nuestra primera victoria. Canto y llanto de la tierra, canto y llanto de la gloria, y entre canto y llanto de la guerra, nuestra primera
Again, that was Sara Gonzalez with Girón, La Victoria. Beautiful song. For those who don't understand Spanish, one of the most beautiful lines says that now we can walk confidently through the paths of history, having known that there were those who actually won victory for us. beautiful words. I hope they will put the lyrics in English for all to see. Now I would like to introduce our dear friend and comrade, Mary Alice Waters.
Alice Waters, quien es editor de Playa Girón, Los Puercos de Playa Girón. La primera derrota militar de los Estados Unidos en Latinoamérica por José Ramón Fernández y Castro. Publicó su libro en español y en inglés y también ha publicado 30 libros más.
You all take a look at on Cuba and the Cuban Revolution, all of them published by Pathfinder Press. Mary Alice is the president of Pathfinder Press and is also a member of the National Committee of the Socialist Workers' Party. We welcome Mary Alice to our event tonight.
Okay, sorry, was on mute. Well, thank you, Manolo, and thank you to all of you who are participating here this evening, and especially to Ambassador Pedroso. It's a real pleasure and honor to be part of this, and to bring a side of the victories that we're celebrating in this program and throughout other events this month that is not often not talked about or not really understood. And that is the place of the Cuban Revolution, and especially the impact of the victory of Playa Girón and the character of the literacy campaign that was conducted in Cuba. The impact on an entire generation, or probably several generations of young people, especially here in the United States, and the importance of it for rebuilding a revolutionary vanguard of the working class here. Our lives were transformed by the example that was set by the Cuban workers, farmers, and youth. And I count myself amongst those because those in the years 60, 61, I was a sophomore at a small college in the Midwest in the United States, in Minnesota, Carleton College, and totally apolitical. I probably would have said I was a Republican at that point if I'd been asked, because that's how my parents voted. But by 6 months later, when the night of April 19th, 1961, as the news broadcasts reported the crushing defeat of the imperialist organized invasion at the Bay of Pigs, I knew I was a socialist. And I knew, even if it was a vaguest idea what that really meant, but I knew that what the Cuban young people of my generation, one of whom you will be hearing from a little bit later in the program, were doing was what I wanted to do, but here in the United States, and to emulate that example. And this is a story of this generation and our activities, especially the building of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee here in the United States during those years, that is told as part of the foreword to the book that Manolo mentioned, the Bay of Pigs, Girón, Playa Girón, the Washington's first military defeat in the Americas. And it was later published in an expanded form in the book Cuba and the Coming American Revolution by Jack Barnes. You'll be hearing more from the next two speakers about the victory of Playa Girón and the battle, and the battle of the literacy campaign as well. But I want to start simply by, I want to go back to the portion of the clip that you saw, the video clip right at the beginning, that showed Fidel giving that magnificent speech on April 16th, 1961, as he was sending off the Revolutionary Armed Forces, the Revolutionary Militias, and the battalions and the others, and Revolutionary Police, to their battle stations for the Battle of Playa Girón. It's a wonderful, after he does explains what he did in the quote that is there, that we have made, what they can't ever forgive us for is we have made a socialist revolution under their nose. He goes on with a few words that I think are also extremely important. He said, whose hands are now raising these weapons? Aren't they the hands of workers? Aren't they the hands of peasants? Aren't they the hands that are hardened by work? Aren't they the hands that create? Aren't they the hands of the humble, the ordinary men and women of Cuba? Our revolution is not defended by mercenaries. It is a democratic, it is defended by the majority of the people. Is it democratic to have a revolution in which working people have the weapons? Compañero, workers and peasants, this is a socialist and democratic revolution of the working people, by the working people, and for the working people. And for this revolution, we are prepared to give our lives. I quote that part of it because I think it captures so well the heart of what we are celebrating here tonight in this program. I want to make just 3 short points. One is that have everything to do with that quote. The greatest obstacle facing working people in the United States and everywhere else in the world is the underestimation of what they are capable of accomplishing, underestimation of their own worth, as Malcolm X referred to it. Because it's drummed into our heads every day and every aspect of the social relations here in the United States. And the example set by the people of Cuba and what they taught us and the entire world is the opposite of that. It's not only that a socialist revolution is necessary, it can be made. That was the first thing. Secondly, from the literacy campaign, which actually began, the first round of it was in the Sierras in the middle of the Revolutionary War, with the educational camps set up by Che in both the Sierra Maestra and the Escambray, and then expanded enormously in the second front under the command of Raúl Castro, an area of some 5,000 square kilometers in Cuba, that where they founded more than 40 schools in a matter of a few months, with teaching children of all ages as well as adults and the revolutionary and the members of the armed rebel army. But it's especially how that campaign was led as a mass campaign that involved 100,000 and overwhelmingly young people, probably a majority of them women, and transformed an entire generation in Cuba. The educators themselves were educated by the peasants and workers they went to teach, with a class consciousness and understanding that stayed with them for the entire rest of their lives. And thirdly, here in the United States, what was unfolding in the rapidly advancing revolution in Cuba was, as we all know, the similarly advancing, powerful, mass, working class, Black-led, victorious battles that soon brought down the entire system of Jim Crow in the United States and changed social relations in the United States forever. Those battles coming together with what we were seeing in Cuba that transformed us. The brigadistas were being hung and lynched by the counter-revolutionaries in Cuba. We were seeing the same thing happen on the front lines of the struggle against Jim Crow here, with the lynchings and vigilante attacks on the Freedom Riders, the sit-ins, and everything else, the Selma, Montgomery, the Battle of Birmingham, and so forth. And it educated us in the lengths to which the US rulers were willing to go to maintain their power, their wealth, and their privileges. The class forces with the power, we could see in our own experience, the class forces that were capable of making a revolution here, right here in the United States. And from the Cuban Revolution, we could see the course of action that was necessary to accomplish that. As Che told the masses, the assembly of some 2,000 or more young people from all over the Americas who gathered in Cuba in the summer of 1960 at the height of the revolutionary mobilization and to expropriate the imperialist powers, the properties. He said, I might be, if I'm asked whether this revolution is a communist revolution, I would answer that by saying that this revolution is Marxist. And listen well that I say Marxist. It is because we have discovered by its own, it has discovered by its own methods the road pointed out by Marx. We can take that with great satisfaction that we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of that revolution, which is our revolution. But we must never forget that our challenge, the challenge for us, is right here in the United States. Our fight and our responsibilities are here in the class struggle in the United States. And our defense of the Cuban Revolution there is not only an act of solidarity, which is one of the most beautiful things in the class struggle, but it is a crucial and inseparable part from educating the working class and working people in the United States, young people, in internationalism and what is necessary to make and transform, make a revolution here. We must never forget that it's only with the defeat of US capitalist rulers ultimately that the future of humanity will be decided. Thank you.
We now will be presenting a video.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I'm sorry. I'm supposed to introduce this. let me just, which I have it, I'm already, it's a real pleasure. Coming in next is our speaker, is Juan Carlos Rodriguez, who is speaking to us from Havana with a recorded video message. That we also want to thank our friends of ECAP, the Cuban Institute for Friendship of the Peoples, for making possible. Juan Carlos is the author of the book, The Inevitable Battle from the Bay of Pigs to Playa Girón. He was a young literacy teacher in the zone of the Zapata swamp at the time that the invasion came. And as one of the authors of the book by Playa Girón, the Bay of Pigs, Jose Ramon Fernandez, who was the commander of the main column of the troops that defeated the invasion at Playa Girón. And his comment on this book was one of the finest accounts available, that's painstakingly researched and without a caricature or oversimplification. And I had the good fortune to get to know Juan Carlos as the longtime director of Editorial Capitan San Luis, which is the publishing house of the Ministry of the Interior, as Pathfinder collaborated with them on the translation to English and production of the book, The Inevitable Battle from the Bay of Pigs to Playa Girón. So that you'll be hearing direct from Juan Carlos himself by a video from Havana.
Mi nombre es Juan Carlos Rodríguez. Estoy aquí para hablar sobre Girón por dos razones. Una, fui maestro voluntario en la Ciénaga de Zapata, víspera de la invasión de Playa Girón. Y en segundo lugar, porque con los años me enamoré del tema ese y escribí este libro, Girón, la batalla inevitable, que me permitió volver a la Ciénaga y entrevistar y investigar y eso. El tema que me trata es el tema de la invasión organizada por los Estados Unidos para destruir la Revolución Cubana. Fidel Castro sabía que la mayor potencia del mundo no permitiría ni el más ligero asomo de soberanía y autodeterminación en lo que consideraba su transpatria. Y Fidel lo que se proponía era precisamente realizar una revolución que constituía un programa radical de soberanía nacional y de profundas transformaciones sociales de beneficio al pueblo cubano, que indiscutiblemente no pocas de ellas chocarían con los Estados Unidos. Por esa razón, a los 10 meses del triunfo de la revolución, septiembre, finales de octubre, Fidel convoca al pueblo a organizar las milicias nacionales revolucionarias y se constituyen las milicias nacionales revolucionarias. En el momento que se produce la invasión, en Cuba habían 600.000 milicianos, de ellos medio millón armados y varios millones de ciudadanos organizados en los comités de defensa de la revolución que neutralizaron a la contrarrevolución interna, que estaba hasta con dinamita y con petacas incendiarias traídas, infiltradas en Cuba, para hacer los actos terroristas más increíbles que se pueden hacer. Ahora, ¿cómo empezó todo esto? Vamos a remontarnos a una fecha, 17 de marzo de 1960. El presidente norteamericano David Eisenhower, en sus memorias, escribe esto: yo le ordené a la agencia, o sea, a la CIA, que comenzara a organizar el entrenamiento de los exiliados cubanos, principalmente en Guatemala, para invadir Cuba. Sí, la invasión por Playa Girón, la idea original, nace en estas indicaciones del 17 de marzo de 1960. Ahora, ¿qué había hecho la revolución y qué había hecho Fidel Castro en esos 15 primeros meses de revolución, 59 a marzo del 60, y que justificaban aparentemente la decisión de Eisenhower de invadir Cuba y acabar con el castrismo? Voy a exponerle la obra de la revolución en esos 15 meses para que ustedes saquen sus conclusiones si eso que había hecho Fidel ameritaba la destrucción de la revolución cubana. En ese corto plazo, Fidel Castro había llevado a cabo la intervención de la empresa eléctrica, rebajar las tarifas del servicio telefónico, rebajó los alquileres en un 50% y prohibió los desalojos, medida de gran impacto social. Imagínense ustedes, cuando no podía pagar un ciudadano el alquiler, lo lanzaban a la calle y terminaba con su familia, niños y todo, durmiendo en los portales de las tiendas. Creó el Instituto Nacional de Ahorro de Vivienda. A través de este se comenzó un vasto plan de construcción de casas en el país. Creó 5.000 aulas, principalmente rurales, y 200 escuelas. Dispuso la rebaja entre un 25 y 35% de los precios de los libros de texto y de las medicinas. Organizó el plan para la rehabilitación de los menores y lanzó una campaña para la erradicación del vicio. La mafia norteamericana, que controlaba los casinos de juego y otros negocios sucios, fue expulsada de Cuba. Decenas de miles de niños desamparados, limpiabotas, vendedores ambulantes, limoneros comenzaron a abandonar las calles. Y fue el artífice de la anhelada ley de reforma agraria. Más de 100.000 títulos de propiedad de la tierra que llevan sus firmas se entregaron a los campesinos. Desapareció el hambre prácticamente en el campo. Eso fue lo que hizo Fidel desde el 1 de enero hasta el 17 de marzo. Y hay que preguntarse, ¿estas medidas justifican la invasión? Saque usted sus propias conclusiones. ¿Quiénes eran los integrantes de la brigada 2506 que invadió Cuba? Escuchen. Siendo los invasores poseían enormes extensiones de tierra, latifundios que habían sido expropiados y sus tierras entregadas a quienes la trabajaban, los campesinos. Otros 67 poseían decenas de miles de viviendas para el arriendo, edificios y todo. La revolución les había entregado a sus moradores. 214 pertenecían a ricas familias que controlaban el comercio, la banca y las industrias. 194 habían pertenecido a las Fuerzas Armadas que apoyaron y sostuvieron al dictador Fulgencio Batista Incluso venían varios torturadores que después fueron juzgados y sancionados. Y otros 112 se habían dedicado en Cuba a negocios erradicados por la revolución, como la prostitución, el juego y la droga. Bueno, especialistas del Pentágono estudiaron bien la isla de Cuba y escogieron un lugar que realmente resulta ideal para lo que se proponían hacer. Un área costera de unos 600 kilómetros cuadrados de tierra firme, excelentes playas separadas del resto de la isla por una vasta ciénaga, en la ciénaga de Zapata. Era un lugar especial, lo que era la zona de Playa Larga, Playa Girón, es una zona de tierra firme, pero está en el mapa, se puede apreciar después, es tierra firme, está separada del resto de la isla por una vasta ciénaga. Es decir, Fidel había construido terraplenes que iban por arriba del agua para ayudar a los camponeros. Desde el principio de la revolución estuvo en eso, haciendo mucho por los cenagueros. Pero los paracaidistas iban a caer al norte de esos terraplenes, que eran terraplenes que salían de Hawái Grande, Central Australia, recorrían hasta 9 kilómetros de ciénaga y llegaban a Playa Larga. Y por el este, en el caso del Central Covadonga, San Blas, otra parte de la ciénaga, hasta llegar a Playa Girón. Eso era un lugar verdaderamente ideal. Los paracaidistas iban a caer al norte de esos terraplenes y no podría pasar ninguna tropa. Ya desde el día anterior, desde el lunes 17 a las 2 de la tarde, 2 y media, y llega el Central Australia, Fidel. Y es el que organiza, y cuando se entera que ya ocuparon Pápire, él va para Pápire, estando los mercenarios a 4 kilómetros de él, en Playa Larga. Incluso el gallego Fernández dice que cuando Fidel llega a Pápire, que al atardecer ya, cayendo la noche, a Pápire, para organizar la ofensiva de esa noche sobre Pápire, estaban cayendo buses cercanos y que ellos sentían la presión de que Fidel se retirara de allí, que no siguiera allí porque podía peligrar su vida. Y Fidel organiza la ofensiva de esa noche, la del ataque de la columna 1 del Ejército Rebelde y del Batallón 39 contra Playa Larga, que provocaron que los mercenarios huyeran en esa misma madrugada para Girón. A las 5 de la tarde aproximadamente del miércoles 19 de abril, los tanques y las tropas de milicianos del Ejército Rebelde llegan a un pequeño cuartel llamado Lechal, que está a 6 kilómetros de Girón. Entonces sale un tanquista, Fidel manda en un tanque a uno de los jefes en el segundo tanque y él se va a montar en el tercer tanque. Y la gente allí como un resorte empieza a gritarle: tú no, Fidel, tú no vas. Y él: yo sí voy, aquí mando yo. Tú no, Fidel, para regularle la vida a Fidel, la gente allí en el Lechal grande. Entonces, Fidel, la respuesta de Fidel fue una respuesta que dejó impactados a todos ellos. La forma en que Fidel les dijo que él era el jefe de la revolución y que como jefe de la revolución él tenía el derecho de combatir y de entrar en Playa Girón igual que lo harían el resto de los compañeros. La gente allí se cayó, todo el mundo se cayó y Fidel partió en un tanque y entró en un tanque a Playa Girón. ¿Qué dejó Girón? ¿Qué dejó la invasión para destruir la revolución cubana de una manera violenta, con la intervención de todas las fuerzas militares norteamericanas que iban a ocupar todo el país completo? Con los años, después de la derrota, un acrecentamiento de la hostilidad del gobierno de los Estados Unidos hacia Cuba, un impulso al bloqueo económico que no ha cesado en todos estos años de revolución. ¿Y cuántos años de revolución ha soportado la revolución? Toda esa hostilidad, esa agresión de todo tipo, y económica que ni se diga, la agresividad mostrada por los Estados Unidos. Y la otra cosa que puedo resumir como contraparte de esta hostilidad del gobierno o de los gobiernos, distintos gobiernos de los Estados Unidos, es la solidaridad internacional con Cuba, que ha estado presente siempre, tanto los gobiernos como progresistas como en todos los pueblos del mundo, como en todos los pueblos de Cuba, por la valentía del pueblo cubano, la sabiduría del gobierno cubano que ha sabido enfrentar el bloqueo y superar los daños que éste ha ocasionado y resistir. Si hay alguna palabra que pueda terminar estos datos que he ofrecido, es la palabra resistencia. Cuba, en 60 años de revolución, ha resistido la hostilidad constante del gobierno norteamericano. Y aquí estamos, y seguiremos. Y agradecerle también a los Estados Unidos, los norteamericanos, que han apoyado la revolución y que han condenado el bloqueo y han criticado todas estas fuerzas muy progresistas, y que sin lugar a dudas hay que agradecerles lo que han hecho por Cuba y lo que están haciendo hoy, y agradecerles a quienes están organizando esta misma actividad y estos videos para ponerlos en los Estados Unidos y en otros lugares que se pueda también. Agradecerles y pedirles a nombre del pueblo que continúen en esa lucha, que no dejen de solidarizarse con Cuba, que sigan ganando adeptos en esta lucha para ver si algún día termina y dejan a Cuba en paz los Estados Unidos, el gobierno de los Estados Unidos, no el pueblo de los Estados Unidos. El pueblo de los Estados Unidos mayoritariamente es un pueblo que ha aceptado la revolución cubana y ha admirado muchas de las cosas de la revolución cubana, como es el servicio de los médicos de la brigada Henry Riff, que fue un norteamericano que luchó por la independencia de Cuba, y cómo esa brigada de médicos han ayudado en solidaridad con todo el mundo. Incluso hay norteamericanos en distintos estados que han solicitado al gobierno la presencia de la brigada médica cubana. Y si lo aprueba el gobierno norteamericano, partirían para combatir la COVID-19 destacamentos, brigadas médicas cubanas, sin duda, con mucho amor para salvar la vida de ciudadanos norteamericanos.
It is such an amazing treat to hear from Juan Carlos Rodriguez, such an important historian, author, researcher, and reminding us of just the solidarity and bonds that we have as a people, that have been historically there, that need to be preserved and promoted. And thank you so much, Mary Alice, as well, for reminding us about the need to build class consciousness and move the class struggle forward in the United States as part of the work in defense of and in solidarity with Cuba and all our brothers and sisters around the world. One of the most important battles in our fight against capitalism and imperialism, Fidel always talked about the battle of ideas. And we can't forget the importance of the battle of ideas in our process of building class consciousness and solidarity. The defense and promotion of our revolutionary values, of our history, of our future. It is so important to build and organize the people power and mobilize it in defense of the revolutionary values and ideas and in favor of our class interests, which are the same class interests as our comrades, friends, brothers and sisters in Cuba. In this process, reclaiming our histories, putting forth our vision and expanding the radical imagination for the future of the masses, of the working class is key. And it is possible to build and defend a revolution. And just like you said, Mary Alice, it is possible for ordinary workers, for people to be able to build a socialist revolution. Not only is it necessary, but history teaches us, Cuba teaches us that it is possible. And so thank you so much for putting forth that hope in this moment in which we are living. On that note, I want to introduce Catherine Murphy, who has devoted many, many years. I'm so excited to introduce her because I'm a fan of Maestra and the recent film with Silvio Rodriguez, like so amazing, such an amazing history. And it's inspiring. It's about reclaiming history and moving forth, the next generation of revolutionaries. So Thank you so much. Catherine Murphy is the founder and director of the Literacy Project. Her documentary, Maestra, explores the 1961 Cuban Literacy Campaign. Again, if you have not watched it, we suggest you do, and you could utilize it as a very important pedagogical tool. It is an amazing, powerful, heartwarming educational tool. So please do go out and check it out. She founded the Literacy Project in 2004 to explore issues of literacy and illiteracy in the Americas. And as a result of these studies in 1990s, she met several women who volunteered in the Cuban Literacy Campaign, and it was through their eyes that this documentary was created. And so without further ado, thank you so much for being with us, Catherine. We are excited to hear from you.
Gracias, Claudia. Thank you so much for those words. I'm really honored to be joining you all this evening to celebrate the 60th anniversary of Cuba's victory over the US-backed mercenary invasion at the Bay of Pigs, and also to celebrate the 60th anniversary of Cuba's massive national literacy campaign, Cuba's victory over illiteracy, which remains one of the most important moments in the social history of the Americas. When the Cuban Revolution triumphed on January 1st, 1959, there were 6 million people on the island. Fully 1 million of them could not read or write. The systematic exclusion of working people, rural people, Afro-Cubans, many women, and the urban poor from quality education was a pillar of the injustice that the revolution was working to change. In September 1960, Fidel Castro announced to the world at the General Assembly of the United Nations that Cuba would become fully literate in 1 year, a seemingly impossible task. They made an open call for volunteer teachers, and 250,000 people stepped forward. 100,000 of those were teenagers, under 18 years old, mostly between the ages of 14 and 17, but some much younger, such as Griselda Aguilera, who was the youngest girl teacher on the literacy campaign and who many of you know. Griselda was only 7 in 1961 and taught 58-year-old Carlos Perez Isla to write the alphabet, to write his name, and to bring him up to the first grade reading level that she had already surpassed. But part of why Fidel knew in September of 1960 that Cuba could overcome illiteracy was not only because they had accomplished the enormous feats of overthrowing Fulgencio Batista and conducting one of the farthest reaching land reforms to date, nationalizing foreign corporations, creating an urban reform law, and the multi-platform program of the Cuban Revolution, but also because there was a vast network of teachers, around 2,000 in the rural communities around the island. They were called Maestros Voluntarios, voluntary teachers. The first contingent of the voluntary teachers set out on April 22nd, 1960. Tomorrow is their 61st anniversary. They landed in rural communities across the island and began to take literacy census, to build the first rural schools, to give immunizations, do basic health education, and so much more. One of those first Maestros Voluntarios was named Conrado Benitez. He was working class, Afro-Cuban young man from the city of Matanzas, who was killed by counter-revolutionary forces in January of 1961, just 3 months before the Bay of Pigs invasion. He was carrying nothing more than the school books with which he had gone to teach. Soon after his murder, the national call was made for more teachers, and the youth brigades were named in his honor, Brigadas Conrado Benitez. I was also really moved to hear Juan Carlos Rodriguez say that he was also a maestro voluntario. That is to say that he went out, he may have known Conrado Benitez, and he went out from April of 1960 to be part of these pilot brigades that lay the foundation for the massive literacy campaign. This new film clip I'm about to share with you also intends to honor this legacy, Conrado Benitez's legacy, and all of the Maestros Voluntarios who planted the seeds that helped to make possible the massive national campaign of the following year, and thereby launched the construction of a robust national education system that is free and universal until today. It is free from primary school through junior high and high school and on to the most advanced degrees in engineering, law, and medicine, which are then practiced for the benefit of the nation and the world. Powerfully evidenced by the Yo Si Puedo program that has benefited millions, taught millions of people around the world to read and write in a multitude of languages. And also powerfully evidenced by the Cuban medical brigades fighting COVID around the world today. I'm honored to share this first clip with you now with the testimonies of two Maestras Voluntarias, Ana Deborah Mola and Flora Belkis Lescay, who knew and worked with Conrado Benitez. Please consider this your film too, and use it in your work to educate about Cuba, to end the cruel and inhuman blockade, and to defend Cuba's right to sovereignty, independence, and self-determination. Viva Cuba libre, y viva el pueblo cubano. Thank you. Maestras Voluntarias.
Clases más necesitadas, en la clase campesina, era analfabeta completa en nuestro país. Por tanto, marchamos en el primer contingente, donde íbamos alrededor de 1.500 jóvenes. Al llegar al lugar destinado, que era la Sierra Maestra, allí primeramente se nos fue ubicando en distintos campamentos.
Improvisábamos y a veces hasta en hojas de los árboles escribían cuando no llegaban las libretas. El contenido de la clase era aritmética, español, cívica, le damos diferentes asignaturas. Igual que aparte de eso, de darle la clase a los niños por la mañana, los mayorcitos la tarde. Damos clase y por la noche los adultos. Nosotros no solamente dábamos clases, nosotros inscribimos a los niños que nacieron allí, que nunca se habían registrado civilmente, casamos a los matrimonios. Y una de las cosas fundamentales es que muchos niños morían parasitados, desnutridos. Lo primero que empezamos a hacer fue un trabajo educacional. Mostrarles, enseñarles a los campesinos la necesidad de por qué tenían que usar zapatos. Nos enseñaron a inyectar, vacunamos a los campesinos. Allí nosotros nos vimos hasta en la necesidad de hacer un parto a veces.
Los pelotones que trabajan por la mañana, por la tarde estudian, y al revés. Un apretado programa de 13 asignaturas, a vencer en 4 meses, consume una porción considerable del tiempo. Una educación arraigada en la realidad, en la vida y para la vida.
Dentro de nosotros hubo una figura que fue el mártir que presidió toda esta campaña de alfabetización, el símbolo de la campaña de alfabetización. Mi compañera tuvo el honor de ser compañera de campamento de Conrado Benitez.
Conrado Benitez era, siempre decimos un muchacho, porque él tenía 19 años y era muy jovencito. muy serio, muy respetuoso. Le gustaban las tareas de compartir con todos los demás. Él estaba ubicado en una escuelita en el Escambray. Ese día da la casualidad que me habían invitado a almorzar a casa de un campesino que tenía un radiecito de pila. Entonces yo, la hora del noticiero, y en eso la noticia. Y yo recuerdo que yo dije, Conrado Benitez, no puede ser, no puede ser. Ese es el compañero nuestro, es mi compañero, mi compañero. Me tuve que sentar a meditar aquel crimen horrendo que pensaron que con eso iban a tratar de que la campaña no se hiciera.
Aquella graduación terminó con llanto porque era un compañero nuestro.
La gran batalla final. Adiós, analfabetismo. Mal de todos los pueblos. Cuba ha vencido ya.
Cuba, Cuba, estudio, trabajo, fusil, lápiz, cartilla, manual, alfabetizar, alfabetizar, venceremos.
Wow, if you haven't seen this before, then you have to watch this. You have to watch the whole film. Thank you, Catherine, so much for this inspiring clip that you shared with us today. Again, if there weren't already enough reasons to defend Cuba, to stand by Cuba, Catherine's work reminds us of many more. Thank you for this testimony of the literacy campaign. I now want to pass it on to Alison, who has some announcements and news for us.
Thank you, Manolo. Hi, everyone. My name is Alison Bodine. I am with the Fire This Time movement for social justice here in Vancouver, Canada, and also with the US-Cuba Normalization Conference Committee, and which is made up of the National Network on Cuba, the Canadian Network on Cuba, and the Table de Concertation Quebec-Cuba, as well as other individuals and organizations. And I'm here to give special encouragement as we all reflect on an incredible program of struggle, of strength, of the Cuban Revolution, to reflect on how we can all be involved in defending Cuba against the criminal United States blockade. I want to encourage everyone that has joined us this evening to join in the international movement to lift the blockade on Cuba. And a very important opportunity is coming this Sunday, April 25th. Since November 2020, a group in the United States called Puentes de Amor, Bridges of Love, led by the Cuban American community, has been promoting the idea of car caravans. I hope many of you have already participated in these lively actions against the US blockade in Cuba in cities across the United States and Canada. But they've been happening every Sunday, last Sunday of every month since November. The next one will be this Sunday, April 25th. And the car caravans are set to take place again in over 50 cities worldwide. This inspiring movement against the inhuman US blockade has been a collaboration organized by local Cuban community and the Cuba Solidarity Movement. And we should all do our part to promote the car caravans, to participate, whether it's bicycles, cars, or walking in these actions as they take place in our communities. On this April 25th, there are over 23 cities in the United States, from small towns in Alabama all the way back to New York City and Washington, D.C., and of course in Miami, Florida, as well as 4 cities across Canada. We will be joined by others in Europe, Latin America, and Africa, and there's no city too small to participate. So I encourage people, if you're organizing a car caravan, post the details in the chat right now, and then also feel free to get in touch if you want to figure out how to organize one or what you can do to join the Puentes de Amor caravans against the US blockade movement, which is a very important part of pressuring the US Biden administration to lift this criminal policy against Cuba. Then in June, the United Nations General Assembly will once again hold its annual vote against the US blockade on Cuba. We know and are certain that for the 30th consecutive year, a vast majority of the world will stand with Cuba against the cruel and harmful blockade. There is no question that this will again be the vote this year, an overwhelming support for Cuba, especially due to their leading role in the worldwide struggle against the pandemic. Cuba has sent over 50 medical brigades to 40 countries in the last year and is actively developing 5 vaccines, as well has been able to maintain its world-class healthcare system in defense of COVID-19 for people within Cuba itself. We know again that this year it'll be more important than ever before that we stand together on this International Day on June 23rd, the week leading before as well, to coordinate our actions internationally against the US blockade and focus on this once again historic United Nations vote in favor of Cuba. We encourage people to organize all sorts of events and actions, and we'll have more details coming up about big coordinated events happening across the United States and Canada. But I encourage people to get involved and to contact us to figure out how you can organize in your community to support this week of actions being called for around the June 23rd United Nations General Assembly vote. We see every year that this cruel blockade continues. The Cuban people continue to fight for their self-determination against outstanding odds, against a criminal blockade that continues to deny them access to food, medicines, basic materials, while at the same time, Cuba sends doctors around the world and provides a world-class education and healthcare system for its people. Cuba, has been said many times, is our lighthouse. It is what we will follow in our world, in our march for a better world together. So I encourage people to get involved in ending the criminal US blockade on Cuba now. Again, from the Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice, I send my solidarity and greetings, and please do get involved and get in touch with the US-Cuba Normalization Committee, and also donate to the Syringes campaign, which Bob Schwartz announced at the beginning, and which we will be posting in the chat again. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Alison, for putting forth everything that folks can engage in or can strengthen in terms of the organizing work. So join the international movement to end the blockade, support the Syringes for Cuba campaign, engage in organizing and educating in our communities so that we're able to mobilize support in defense of Cuba as a constant thing until we're able to, again, end the blockade and establish normal relationships with our sister country. That's what we are asking for the respect to the sovereignty of a nation. That should be what we push for. And again, the human right that Cuba has to develop itself and its people is something that we should advocate and move forward. That the blockade against Cuba is immoral and inhumane. So we have just a couple of minutes left to our event, and I think we are going to take up some questions for the panelists. And so the way in which we are going to do this, and Alison and I can correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you have a question, you could post it on the Q&A option on your screen, and we'll be monitoring it to be able to answer them, or just leave the panelists to answer them. So yes, Julie, we are taking questions for the panelists, so please feel free. You're gonna give it a couple of minutes because the chat was very live when people were talking, and now no one wants to say anything.
There was a couple of questions in the Q&A about how the development of the Cuban vaccines that had come up, and if somebody wants to address that, and also how will the materials, the syringes, and other things that Cuba need be gotten there. So maybe somebody can address that.
If I may address, Ike, the first question, I would not be able to give an exact date for when the Cuban vaccines will be ready. We are all looking that they are in place sooner than later. But what I can say is that two of them has been properly said that we are developing 5 vaccine candidates, but 2 of them, Soberana and Octala, are a very quite advanced process, actually in the 3rd phase of the trial, and all the results until now are very promising. So we, in any event, we are envisaging that these 2 candidates can be first available for people. Thank you.
Ike, I'd be happy to tackle the second part of the question. We're trying to source syringes globally. Syringes are in very short supply, as I indicated earlier.
Disponibles fácilmente. Estamos tratando de obtenerlas a través de China, que es donde la mayoría de las jeringas son hechas. Estamos trabajando con el network con Cuba para obtenerlas. La segunda pregunta es cómo las enviamos a Cuba. Los contenedores, también no hay muchos contenedores disponibles para enviarlos, al menos que se obtengan por Amazon. No es fácil obtenerlas. Hay muchos elementos que estamos tratando de poner juntos para resolver estos problemas. Obtenerlos en Estados Unidos es absolutamente imposible en Estados Unidos. La estamos tratando de comprar las suficientes para todo el año. Estamos lidiando con un ambiente que es bastante difícil porque hay un precio muy alto de las jeringas. Hemos comprado quizás ya 2 millones, necesitamos 2 millones. Pero para enviarlas en un contenedor caben 1.9 millones de jeringas en un contenedor. Eso es lo que estamos confrontando en este momento y no es fácil. Como pueden ver ustedes por el webinar de esta noche, la gente está muy comprometida y afectada también cuando han estado en Cuba y han estado inspirados por Cuba.
Find a way to push this campaign through. There were a number of statements in the Q&A about where can I find a caravan? Is there a caravan in Philadelphia? I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that question. I think there was one question about Jose Ramon Fernandez that maybe Mary Alice could talk about, and their attitude about the factors that led to the defeat at Playa Girón with Che.
Well, it's very good. The Jose Ramon Fernandez, as well as Che and Fidel, always emphasized that what happened, that the defeat of the mercenary forces at Playa Girón was not due to blunders by the CIA or the vacillations of John F. Kennedy or anything else. Fernandez says, they came very well prepared. strategically and tactically, they had a plan that was excellent, and they were well armed. The reason they were defeated was they had no just cause to defend. And there's a wonderful quote from Che, who was speaking a couple of several weeks after the victory at Playa Girón to a group of electrical workers in Havana and milicianos, and where he says, they lost because they didn't understand the moral equation. They didn't understand, and the U.S. rulers never understand this kind, because it's a class blindness, that they didn't understand that the sons of some of the richest landowners, factory owners, all the rest in Cuba, coming to put in a presence as part of the brigade, so that when they won, they would get their property back. They didn't understand that they were coming to take that property away from the peasants who now had it, and that there was no equivalency in the desire to win. And I think it's a very important point. Because we're always told here in the United States, this was all just due to the CIA being, not having a good plan and the vacillations of the Kennedy administration and so forth. But that was not the case.
There was another question, which I think is an important one, and I think anyone can answer, but it's open. Why is it important for new generations in the US and Canada and throughout the world to support Cuba? Any of our youthful speakers can answer.
So many
Catherine.
amazing people with so much more to say than I do, but I'll just say my little granito de arena. Cuba proves that many of the most pressing global problems that we all face are solvable. They are absolutely solvable, that it takes political will, organizing, and commitment. And that Cuba, with so much fewer resources than most countries in the world, has been able to overcome so many of these problems. If we learn all these lies here, that we can't have healthcare for all, that we can't have robust quality education for all, that we can't give housing for all, and those are lies, and Cuba proves it.
Best answer ever. Thank you, Catherine. There's also a question about if there are any actions being planned to protest Biden and Harris's decision to not reverse the different anti-Cuba restrictions, sanctions. They made a campaign promise to return to Obama-era relations, but now they say ending Trump's punishment of Cubans is not a priority. From our organizers in the Normalization Project, any leads on this?
Well, we were laying out, I think we've done throughout this webinar and through all of our activities, if people go to the website, we're fighting what we've always fought for, to end the embargo, to end the blockade, to end sanctions. And we think that we can pressure the administration that this discussion advances. We also think that as Cuba does roll out the vaccine, as the truth about what it is accomplishing gets out, which we're trying to do with webinars like this, that it will break down and pressure the administration which right now wants to take advantage in some ways of the difficulties that have increased in Cuba because of the tightening of the blockade. And it's very consciously stressful against the Cuban economy. It's a policy of asphyxiation, and the pressure needs to be stepped up. Things like the June 23rd action, joining the caravans, all the fronts of activity need to be stepped up and organized, and we're trying to do that in cities across the country and the world.
Thank you, Ike. And with that, we want to close tonight's event. Firstly, by thanking all the organizers and members of the International U.S.-Cuba Normalization Committee. We would like to thank Ambassador Pedroso for his amazing presence with us tonight. Thanks to all the speakers for their wonderful presentations. And of course, thank you to the interpreters, to the tech folks, to the folks working audiovisual tonight, to all the hands that made tonight possible. And of course, we cannot forget, we would like to thank all of you for joining tonight's webinar. Claudia?
Thank you all so much. I just want to emphasize how important this webinar and this conversation is. And the hope is that we could take it off the virtual and into the communities. There needs to be more relationship building of the international and solidarity movement with the movements against police brutality, with the movements around housing, with the movement to end or abolish the prison system. We need to be able to deepen the consciousness of our communities to understand that we have everything in common with the Cuban people. We are workers. We are poor, we are dispossessed, and the capitalist system, the imperialist system has done to us what it's meant to do and has done around the world. And what we want to do and what we want to gain is liberation. And that's where we're working towards. And the socialist project of Cuba is a beam of hope of what is possible. So thank you so much for joining us. We must work towards ending the blockade, engaging in education in our communities, joining the campaign for the syringes of Cuba, and doing everything in our power to be beyond solidarity with our comrades, friends, and sisters in Cuba. Their project is our project, and Cuba has taught us that as well. And so we must defend it. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you everyone for making the time. Viva Cuba revolucionaria y socialista. Siempre, hasta la victoria.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Viva!
Viva siempre.
Viva siempre. Gracias.